They didn't know who she was, and that's what made them dangerous. The sun had just started to stretch across the sleepy town of Fairgrove, its golden light spilling onto the quiet streets. On the surface, it looked like a town out of a postcard. Freshly cut lawns, families walking dogs, and flags flapping in the warm July breeze. But beneath the charm, Fairgrove still clung to old habits, the kind that whispered judgments and assumed stories before the truth could speak. At the center of this soon-to-erupt storm sat a young black woman, no older than 26, alone behind the wheel of a matte black Rolls-Royce Phantom. She wore simple clothes, jeans, white tee, her afro puffed like a halo, and drove without a trace of arrogance. She didn't have to flaunt wealth. It followed her in silence. Stitched into every inch of the vehicle, she calmly guided down Elm Street. To onlookers, she didn't belong in that car. That was their first mistake. Officer Dale Henderson had been patrolling these streets for 11 years. A man carved from suspicion, pride, and the unchecked confidence of authority. He didn't need a reason to act, just a gut feeling. As he watched the Rolls glide past the intersection, his gut told him something was off. He flipped on his lights. The Phantom pulled over smoothly, quietly, as if it had nothing to prove. The woman inside didn't flinch. No phone to the ear. No frantic rummaging. Just a pause, a breath. And then her window rolled down halfway. To Henderson. This wasn't just a traffic stop. It was a performance. A moment to reassert control. A reminder that in his town, you earned the right to drive a car like that, and you didn't earn it in silence. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She simply waited. And Officer Henderson didn't like that. He asked unnecessary questions, demanded answers that didn't matter. Her ID, her purpose. Why she looked so calm. Why she seemed so unbothered. Each question felt more like an interrogation. Each moment dripping with a bitterness. He tried to pass off his protocol, but she never faltered. She handed over her documents with a steady hand. Her license bore a name he didn't recognize, but the address, it wasn't local. It was a place that made eyebrows rise. Beverly Hills. And next to her name, in the fine print, CEO Carter Holdings. Still, Henderson smirked. Internet job, he muttered under his breath. They're all into those these days. He walked back to his cruiser with her ID in hand, not to verify it, but to look for a reason. Any reason to validate the discomfort stirring inside him. The reason he didn't want to admit. She shattered every expectation he held of women who looked like her. But what Henderson didn't know was that his every word, every action, every ounce of unjustified scrutiny was being recorded, not just by her dashboard camera. Not just by a bystander across the street filming discreetly, but by someone else, someone who had been tracking incidents like this across the country, someone powerful. And as the footage uploaded in real time to a private legal database, protocols were triggered. Not revenge, justice. The kind you don't see coming. The kind that doesn't scream in protest, but moves silently behind closed doors. Dismantling power brick by brick. Because the woman in the Rolls-Royce wasn't just a CEO. She was Olivia Carter. Heiress to a multi-billion-dollar legacy built from clean energy, global real estate, and philanthropic tech. Her grandfather had marched with Dr. King. Her mother sat on the board of international humanitarian councils. And Olivia, she had money. But more importantly, she had reached. By the time Officer Henderson returned to her window, smirking with a ticket half-written in his hand, the ripples of his mistake had already begun spreading through the digital ether. Step out of the vehicle, he said, now puffed up with assumed control. And she did, gracefully, calmly, not because she had to, but because she knew something he didn't. He had already lost. Officer Dale Henderson stood with arms crossed, chin slightly lifted, the ticket held like a weapon of authority in his gloved hand. The woman now stood before him, not defiant, not aggressive, but still in that way that unsettles a man who's used to power going unchallenged. Behind her, the matte black Phantom stood like a silent guardian, its polished surface reflecting the red and blue pulse of the patrol car's lights. But what Officer Henderson didn't notice, not yet, were the cell phones pointed in his direction. One across the street, one from the corner store window, another from inside a parked truck, each lens catching a different angle, each second archiving his downfall. Still, he pushed forward. "You got a problem with the law?" Miss P asked, smirking as he tore the ticket from the pad. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence had weight, and it spoke volumes. It unnerved him, because in that moment, Dale wasn't confronting a suspect or a civilian. He was standing face to face with a mirror, and what he saw was a man hiding behind a badge, his insecurities cloaked in procedure. She took the ticket, glanced at it, and gently tucked it into her back pocket. Then, without a word, she stepped back into her Rolls-Royce, the engine humming like a lion with no interest in a fight. Henderson stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what had just passed between them. There was no yelling, no threats, no tears, just composure, and it gnawed at him. He got back into his cruiser, still burning with the need to feel in control. He didn't know that at that very moment, a flagged incident had been triggered in a system far beyond his jurisdiction. It started with a ping, a compliance alert fired off inside a law firm 300 miles away, one that partnered with a private accountability watchdog. The firm was funded quietly by the Carter Foundation, a network Olivia's family had built over decades to fight systemic abuse, not with noise, but with structure. Olivia didn't need to call anyone. She didn't need to post online. Her protection had already been built, programmed, monitored, tested, and deployed. She was the system. Within 15 minutes, the footage from the dashboard, synced with GPS and bodycam timestamps, was already in review by civil rights attorneys in D.C. and New York. A legal associate flagged the stop as suspicious. No probable cause. No citation reason stated clearly. A detainment based solely on appearance and assumptions. Another ping. The video from the corner store was uploaded to a watchdog Twitter account with 2.1 million followers. No names were shared. Just HASHTAGS. Driving while black #Fairgrove, PD #Olivia Carter, and then it hit the trending page. By lunchtime, the mayor's office in Fairgrove was getting calls, national media inquiries, requests for comment, public records. Within hours, Officer Dale Henderson's name was circulating in 1,000 retweets, 1,000 angry voices demanding accountability. He had no idea. Dale sat in the break room with two fellow officers, laughing over vending machine coffee. Someone showed him a clip on their phone, muted. He watched himself walk up to the Rolls-Royce. The black woman inside so composed, so still, it felt staged. "Is that you?" his colleague asked, raising an eyebrow. Dale nodded, chuckling. "Yeah, just some influencer probably trying to get views." But then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Unknown number. Then, his captain. He answered with a casual, "What's up, Cap?" What followed was a voice sharp with fury. A demand to return to the precinct. Now, a warning that the department's servers were overloaded with record requests. That news, trucks were circling the town. That the governor's office had been contacted. Reality hit like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a routine stop. This was an earthquake, and he was standing dead center. Elsewhere, Olivia Carter sat in her penthouse, suite 2 states away. She hadn't needed to say a word. She never even posted about it. She didn't have to. Instead, she held a press conference not about the stop, but about the expansion of her company's scholarship program for black girls in tech. When asked by a journalist if she'd seen the now viral video, she smiled. "I've seen a lot of videos," she replied, "but I prefer to work on solutions." The journalist pushed. "Will the officer face legal action?" She replied calmly, "The law will handle the law." But behind the scenes, lawyers were already drafting filings. The Department of Justice had taken note. Internal Affairs launched an emergency review, and Henderson was told to surrender his badge pending investigation. He wasn't arrested. He wasn't dragged through the street, but he was grounded publicly, completely, silently. Dale Henderson sat alone in his living room, the hum of the ceiling fan masking the quiet chaos that had become his life. The same walls that once made him feel proud, lined with awards and framed photos in uniform, now felt like a museum of a past life, a life that was unraveling faster than he could hold it together. The badge he once polished every morning now sat in a sealed envelope on the kitchen table. It looked smaller somehow, lighter, even as if stripped of its weight the moment he was forced to surrender it. Internal Affairs didn't need long. The footage was clear. The records were damning. And the silence from his fellow officers spoke volumes. No one had his back now. Not publicly, not officially. His phone rang non-stop the first few days. Reporters, national news outlets, legal reps from activist groups. Then came the silence. No more calls, no more noise. Just silence so loud it vibrated in his bones. Outside, protests, signs gathered like wildflowers. A growing wave of locals and out-of-town activists lined the sidewalk near the precinct. They didn't shout his name. They didn't have to. His face had become symbolic, not of one bad choice, but of a legacy of quiet injustice long ignored. And what made it worse, he didn't even remember her name. That young black woman, composed, quiet, and strangely unbothered, had turned his world upside down with nothing but her presence. No shouting, no retaliation, no scene. She hadn't burned the house down. She'd simply opened the window and let the world look in. And what they saw, it wasn't just Dale Henderson. It was a system long overdue for accountability. Meanwhile, in a conference room 3 states away, Olivia Carter stood before a semicircle of corporate leaders, attorneys, and journalists, discussing a new digital infrastructure grant for low-income high schools. She moved through the presentation like a seasoned stateswoman, polished, intentional, unshakable. There were no references to the incident, no mention of police, no press statements of outrage, because Olivia knew something her critics didn't. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly, signs a check, and shifts the future. Still, the ripples continued. The Carter Foundation's legal team submitted a formal civil rights complaint with the state's attorney general, not just for Olivia, but to audit the patterns of racial profiling in Fairgrove PD. Years of overlooked stops, unreported complaints, sealed settlements, all began to unravel. The town's mayor, who once ran on a platform of tradition and security, found himself dodging press outside City Hall. His carefully curated image was now watermarked with shame. "We're cooperating fully with the investigation," he stammered during a press briefing. Fairgrove values all its residents equally. But his words rang hollow, because in the days following the incident, more people came forward. A teenager who was stopped while walking home with a backpack. A mother whose son was searched on his way to football practice. A delivery driver who was questioned 3 times in 1 week. While driving through certain neighborhoods, their stories had been ignored, forgotten, buried. Until now, Olivia's silence had become a megaphone, not of rage, but of revelation. And for Dale, the weight grew heavier. His daughter, once proud of her father's uniform, now asked her mother why the other kids whispered in school. His wife avoided eye contact at the grocery store. His pastor offered a quiet nod instead of a handshake. He had become a man reduced to headlines. But what truly unraveled him wasn't the public disgrace. It was the realization that he had been seen, and not just by the world, but by someone who could have destroyed him, and didn't. Olivia Carter had more than enough power to press charges, file lawsuits, drag his name through every media circuit. But she didn't. She hadn't called him out by name once. Instead, she focused on legacy. On scholarships, on reform, on lifting others. And in that contrast, between his misuse of authority and her quiet grace, the shame burned brighter than any punishment ever could. Across the country, young black women watched the video and saw more than just injustice. They saw poise, dignity, a woman who didn't need to scream to be heard. Teachers played her story in classrooms as an example of what it means to fight without fists. Law schools studied the legal framework behind her protection system, the dashcam integration, the AI-based legal ping network, the automatic transmission to civil rights databases. Startups began replicating her approach, calling it silent armor, and the media, they called her the quiet billionaire, not because she lacked a voice, but because she chose her moments carefully. She didn't trend by accident. She trended by choice. And in doing so, she shifted the narrative from victimhood to vision. The town of Fairgrove had never felt so quiet. The same streets that once hummed with routine now carried a different energy. Not panic, not rebellion, but reflection. Shop windows once cluttered with seasonal displays now featured signs that read, "We stand for justice," or "Equality matters here." Some did it out of guilt, others out of fear. But a few did it out of something deeper, awakening. And on a cloudy Monday morning, Olivia Carter came back. No entourage, no media warning, no flash of luxury. This time, she arrived in a modest black SUV with tinted windows, wearing a simple navy blazer over a pale turtleneck. Her afro was wrapped in a silk scarf, her eyes shielded behind oversized sunglasses. She walked through the town like someone returning not for vengeance, but for closure. Her destination wasn't the precinct. It was the community center on Jefferson Street. Inside, city officials, nonprofit leaders, and educators had gathered for a town forum. The purpose? To announce a partnership between the Carter Foundation and Fairgrove's Education Board. The initiative would fund after-school STEM programs, mentorship opportunities for young women of color, and scholarships for students from historically overlooked neighborhoods. No one clapped right away. When Olivia entered, they stood, silent, unsure, awed. Then the mayor, grey-faced and visibly nervous, stepped forward with a tremble in his voice. "Miss Carter, we're honored, and we're sorry." She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She simply walked to the podium, laid down a folder, and looked at the room. "I didn't come here today to accept your apology," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I came to change what happens next." A pause. A silence so dense it felt like the walls leaned in. "I grew up being told I had to work twice as hard to be seen as equal," she continued. "I believed that if I played the game right, dressed well, spoke properly, stayed calm, I could escape what others couldn't. But the truth is, no amount of money, education, or influence makes you immune when someone sees only your skin." Eyes dropped. Mouths tightened. "But here's what I've also learned," she said, voice rising with quiet strength. "Power, used for ego collapses, but power used for others. Power that builds, funds, mentors, and protects. That is the kind that lasts." She announced a $10 million investment into Fairgrove over the next 3 years. Not a handout, a challenge. One condition: the police department must implement and publicly report quarterly bias training, recruit diversity officers, and partner with the Foundation's civic technology team to deploy bodycam oversight through an independent ethical review board. This wasn't charity. This was infrastructure. Outside the center, a small group of residents gathered, not to protest, but to watch, to see, perhaps, what justice could look like without fire. And across the street, behind the tinted glass of a parked sedan, Dale Henderson sat in silence. He had been advised not to attend the meeting. To public, too soon. But he came anyway, not out of defiance, but curiosity. As he watched her speak, a strange emotion bubbled inside him. Not resentment, not bitterness, but something closer to regret. Because deep down, in that shadowed corner of his conscience, he finally understood. This wasn't about him. It never was. It was about all the moments he didn't question, all the assumptions he had let guide his instincts, all the opportunities to listen that he had ignored. He thought power meant control, but now he saw it. Power was influence. Power was legacy. Power was a woman who didn't raise her voice yet had made the entire country listen. As Olivia stepped out of the center, she paused, looked across the street. Her eyes met Dale's, even through the glass. He didn't look away. He didn't raise a hand. He just sat there, exposed, unmasked, human. And Olivia. She nodded once. Not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement. A signal that the work ahead would not be about him, or people like him, but about the generations who would never have to lower their eyes in the face of injustice again. She got back into her SUV and drove off. No escort, no applause, just a quiet departure. The kind that leaves ripples in the soul. In the days that followed, headlines shifted. Quiet billionaire launches Justice Tech Fund. Fairgrove becomes model for civic reform. From silence to system, Olivia Carter's legacy begins. But for Olivia, legacy wasn't measured in headlines or hatch-ask. It was in the teenage girl who signed up for robotics club that week. It was in the officer who hesitated before pulling someone over without cause. It was in the mayor who began showing up to school board meetings, not for votes, but for answers. And in a small studio apartment miles away, Dale Henderson filled out an application for an online course in ethics and restorative justice, not because he thought it would change everything, but because, for once, he wanted to understand what he had never been taught to see. Because in the end, the girl he thought was just another face in a fancy car became the force that quietly changed an entire system, without raising her voice, without lifting a finger, just by refusing to be underestimated.